I went inside, no rain sideways. The air smelled of disinfectant and cold coffee. A nurse at the counter looked up. "Mr. Harris? He's been asking for you." Her voice softened on the last words. "He doesn't have much time." I nodded, signed the form my hands barely recognized, and walked down a long white corridor. Every step echoed like a tick of a clock. Room 217. He lay there smaller than I remembered, his frame swallowed by the bed, tubes like roots tying him to the world. His hair, once thick and stubborn, had gone the color of paper ash, but it was the eyes that undid me. Those same restless, guilt-streaked eyes. When he saw me, something fragile passed across his face. Not joy, not relief, maybe recognition of a ghost he'd tried to forget. He tried to speak, but coughed instead. I poured him a glass of water, the cup trembling between my hands. "Don't talk yet. Just breathe." He nodded, slow, then closed his eyes as if he'd been waiting his whole life to finally rest. The monitor beeped steady. I sat beside him and stared at the wall clock. 9:37. The same hour our father used to come home from the fields. Funny the things your mind chooses to keep. I wanted to say so many things. How I hated him, how I missed him, and how both felt the same after a while. But words are clumsy tools, and I'd use them to build walls, not bridges. So I just sat there, listening to the rain tapping the window like a second hand counting down. After a while, Thomas stirred. His voice was barely a whisper. "You came." "I did," I said. "Didn't think you would." "I almost didn't." A pause stretched between us, long and heavy, filled with all the years we'd thrown away. "I have to tell you something before I go." The rain beat harder. A flash of lightning lit his face, thin, pale, almost translucent. I leaned closer. "Save your strength." He shook his head. "No, you've carried the wrong story too long. It wasn't an accident, Jacob. It wasn't the tractor. It was me." The words hung there, unreal. Then the world went very still. Outside, thunder rolled over the fields, and that's where the truth began. When I first sat there beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, I thought he might drift back into sleep before saying another word. But the silence in the room seemed to pull him back. He looked at the ceiling for a long while, and then his eyes shifted toward me. Old eyes, but still the same shade of storm gray that had followed me all my life. I didn't say anything. There's a point where words only get in the way. I just waited, and in that stillness the years began to fold back on themselves. We were boys again, in that farmhouse at the edge of Ash Ridge County, where the fields stretched farther than our dreams ever did. Father used to wake us before dawn. "The world doesn't wait for slow hands," he'd say, voice like gravel. He was a hard man, not cruel, but made of a kind of iron that expected the same from his sons. Thomas was always the one trying to prove he could match him. He'd swing the axe longer, push the plow faster, run the horse till sweat foamed at its neck. I was quieter, took to fixin' things, watchin' the sky. He thought that made me soft. Maybe it did. That summer was dry, the kind that cracked the earth open and made temper short. Father was restless. Every sound in the house felt sharper, louder. The nights were worse, heat sitting heavy on our chests. And then came the argument. I can still see it. The barn door half opened, dust hanging like ghosts in the sunlight. Thomas standing there, shoulders tight. Father in front of him, holding the ledger, the one with the bank's red stamp on it. We were losing the land, though he'd never said it out loud. I heard my name, heard Father shouting that I would inherit what little was left because I had sense. It was like something inside Thomas cracked. He yelled something I couldn't catch, stepped forward, and the shovel in his hand slipped as he swung. It wasn't a full blow, more a flinch, a reflex, but Father staggered backward, his heel catching the edge of the trough. The sound of his head hitting a stone behind it wasn't loud, but it was final. I ran toward them. Thomas froze, hand shaking, staring down at Father's body as if expecting him to get up and start yelling again. But the only sound was the flies outside, and Thomas whispering, "What did I do?" I remember kneeling there, trying to find a pulse. There wasn't one. The air around us felt thick, unmoving. I told him we needed to call the sheriff, but he just looked at me with wild eyes and said no one would believe it was an accident. He grabbed my arm, begged me not to tell. And I didn't. God forgive me, I didn't. We buried Father under the guise of a stroke. Folks nodded, said hard work catches up to every man eventually. Thomas took over the farm. I left soon after. Couldn't stand the sight of those fields anymore. In the hospital room, Thomas's breath rasped. He said quietly, "I see him, his eyes on the corner of the ceiling. Every night I see him standing there in the barn. I thought if I worked enough, prayed enough, it'd go away, but it never did." His voice faltered. I could see tears gathering, trembling in the corners of his eyes. "You should have had the farm. You should have had everything. I took it all, and it burned me alive." I wanted to hate him, but sitting there with the smell of disinfectant and the soft beeping of machines, all I saw was my brother, broken, scared, waiting to die with a secret that had killed him years ago. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold, papery. I whispered, "You were just a boy. We both were." He tried to smile. That's what I told myself, too. And then he closed his eyes. The nurse dimmed the lights before I left that first night. The corridors of St. Luke's hummed with the low sound of vents and tired footsteps, the kind of quiet that only hospitals know. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened, each puddle holding the yellow reflection of a street lamp. I drove home slow, not wanting to arrive anywhere, my hand shaking slightly on the wheel. I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear the engine, the tires against the wet road, something real and ordinary. The confession replayed in my head like a broken film reel, each image sharper than the last. The barn door, the dust, our Father's eyes. I had carried those pictures in me for decades without color, and now they bled. At the house, the porch light flickered. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. I sat for a long time before unlocking the door, half expecting to see Thomas inside, younger, barefoot, asking if I'd come help mend the fence. But only the clock greeted me, ticking in its same lonely rhythm.
The next morning I went back. The nurse smiled when she saw me, polite, professional. She said Thomas had slept most of the night, that his breathing had steadied. I thanked her and stepped inside his room. He looked a little better, though that word never means much in a place like that. His skin had a trace of color, his eyes half open. I sat by the window. We didn't speak. Through the glass I could see the outline of the town, the grain silo, the church steeple, the stretch of highway leading back to the farm. It looked smaller, quieter, as if time had decided to move differently here. I thought of the barn, how it might look now, the boards gray and splintered, the trough still there, maybe filled with rainwater. I knew I'd have to go. That evening, when the nurses switched shifts, I drove out toward Ash Ridge. The fields were overgrown, the fences leaning like old men. The house stood where it always had, its paint peeled to bare wood. I parked beside the gate and walked. The grass whispered around my boots, and somewhere a crow cried once, sharp and lonely. The barn door creaked when I pushed it open. Dust rose in slow motion through the dying light. Everything smelled of rust and hay. The trough was still there. I stood where he'd fallen, though time had erased the exact place. The silence was complete. I spoke softly, not to anyone, just into the air. He told me, Dad. After all these years, he told me. The words sounded strange, like someone else's voice. I waited for something, a wind, a sign, forgiveness maybe. But there was only the settling of old wood.
Of youth. That's what we are, I thought. Marks in the wood. We fade, but we never really disappear. Later that evening, I went to the cemetery. It was quiet, except for the sound of crows in the distance and the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes. Father's grave was where it always had been, beside Mother's. Thomas's name wasn't there yet, just a mound of fresh soil waiting for the stone. I sat between them, between the man I wronged and the brother I lost, and for the first time I felt something whole. Not joy, not sorrow, something in between, something like release. The sun slipped behind the hill, and I realized how the light bent through the trees, gold on one side, shadow on the other. Just like us, I thought, always caught between light and dark. But maybe that's where peace really lives, not in one or the other, but in the space between. I stayed until the sky turned blue-black. Fireflies came out, blinking like small, stubborn memories. And when I finally stood to leave, I looked back once more at their names. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to apologize. They already knew. The drive home was silent. No radio, no music, just the hum of the tires and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Outside, the world looked softer. The houses, the street lights, the people walking their dogs, all of it strangely kind, as if the universe had finally exhaled. When I reached my house, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat in the dark, listening to the night settle. And then, quietly, I said to myself, We were never meant to be perfect, only to try, fail, and love again. The clock ticked. Somewhere far away, thunder rumbled, not angry, just distant. And for the first time in decades, I closed my eyes without fear. I slept. And in that sleep, there was no fire, no shouting, no regret. Only the sound of rain returning to the fields. When you get old, the nights grow longer, and the memories get louder. You think you buried them, deep enough that time might forget, but they find you anyway. In the quiet, in the rain, in the sound of a gate you swore you'd never open again. It was 3 days after I got the call. Thomas was dying, and the doctors said, if you want to make peace, you should come now. I didn't answer right away. I sat there in my chair, the old house ticking like a clock that had outlived its owner, and I wondered if peace was even something I deserved. When I reached the hospital, he looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was white, not from age, but from the kind of guilt that turns a man gray from the inside out. He looked up when I came in, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the boy I once envied, the boy I once hated. But hate doesn't last forever. It rots until all that's left is sorrow wearing anger's clothes. He said, "You came?" And I said, "You called." That was our way, short, guarded. 2 old men pretended not to remember the same night that broke us both. He smiled, just barely. Then he said, "Do you ever go back?" And I knew what he meant. Not the town, not the barn, but that night. The night Father died. For years I told myself it was an accident. But the truth is, I struck him first. A moment of anger, a shout, a push, and then the world went silent. I ran. Thomas stayed. He tried to save Father, but the fire did what we couldn't undo. He took the blame. He always did. And I let him. Years went by. We buried him with words we didn't mean. And I built a life that never felt like mine. Married, worked, grew old, but every time it rained I heard the same sound. Wood cracking, someone shouting my name, and then the silence. When Thomas asked me to stay the night, I did. We talked until dawn, about the people we loved and lost, about how the world got faster while we got slower. And when the morning came, he said something that still echoes in me. He said, "You don't have to confess to me. I already forgave you." He didn't say when. He didn't need to. Because forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a lifetime of choosing not to hate. He passed 2 days later. Peaceful, they said. And maybe he was, because when I went back to the farm, I swear I could feel him there in every creak, every gust of wind through the rafters. He wasn't haunting me anymore. He was freeing me. I walked to the old barn. The wood smelled the same. Earth and dust, old sweat and regret. I looked at Father's photo, still nailed to the beam, faded but not gone, like memory itself. And I spoke to him, not out loud, not for the world, just for us. "I'm sorry, Pa. I should have told the truth. I should have saved him. I should have been the son you thought I was. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, like the earth after rain. Later, I sat by their graves, Father's and Thomas's. Between them, the ground felt warm. I closed my eyes and let the wind touch my face, and for the first time in half a century, I didn't flinch. No guilt, no anger, just the sound of the world carrying on the way it always does. When you've lived long enough, you realize life isn't about forgiveness from others. It's about forgiving the person who looks back at you in the mirror. That's the hardest part. That's the only way the ghosts ever sleep.